Hello, welcome to the January 11th version of the Kubernetes SIG CLI biweekly meeting. My name is Sean Sullivan, and I will be hosting today's meeting. We have a fairly large agenda, so we'll get right into it. So I'll start with the announcements, and we do have the dates for version 127, the upcoming release. The enhancements freeze is actually within a month on Thursday, February 9th. And then the code freeze is about a month later on Tuesday, March 14th, and hopefully we'll be releasing 127 on April 11th. So does anyone else have any announcements they'd like to add? Okay, let's move on to welcoming new members. There are a couple of new faces. This is the time where you get to introduce yourself to your SIG CLI colleagues if you want to. This is totally voluntary. Does anybody want to say hi and introduce themselves?
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I am pretty new to this SIG CLI. I have attended one meeting so far, and just to put it out there, myself Shivam Tyagi. I'm joining from India, and I have been a contributor to Kubernetes docs earlier, and now I'm pretty darn interested in Kubernetes CLI. So that is why I'm here and trying to contribute to some good first issues. Thank you.
Pleasure to meet you. Thanks for dropping by. Is there anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? Okay, so this is where we're going to have the sub-project updates. We're going to be talking KEPs, so I guess we don't have to, unless we want to talk about KEP updates. Is there any of the sub-projects that would like to give a quick update?
We'll be releasing a big major release of CUI, not for any deep reason, but just because there were some breaking changes. A lot of bug fixes, minor stuff, but this bumps the version of React and the version of Electron. So major bump, couple bug fixes, nothing deep.
Great, thanks, Nick. Do we? If you'd like to, please update the notes with more detail if you'd like on that update.
Sure thing.
Related to that, for Customize, we're also planning a major version release. I believe I mentioned this before the holidays because this is a plan that's been in the works for a while, and we actually were hoping to get the release out before the holidays, but for various reasons we weren't able to, and we're now targeting the end of the month. We'll provide more information on what exactly lands in the release when we do it, but it's going to be an exciting one. We're going to have some great features, some long-awaited fixes, and just a bunch of improvements overall. So we're really excited for that.
Cool, thank you very much. Are there any other sub-projects that we will talk about? If not, we could move into the open discussion, which is, let me open up the KEP on apply, prune, redesign. So Justin, I made you a co-host in case you want to present anything. Katrina is a co-host. I'm going to hand it over to Katrina if that's okay.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, so this is still a draft PR. It's still something that we're very much working on. And we wanted to present it early, both because there's only a month left before enhancements freeze and we want to allow lots of time for feedback, but we also want to invite other people to get involved now that we think we have enough information sort of set down in the CAP to provide that background for people to understand where we're thinking and all the context that has gone into the process so far. Notably, we tried to synthesize several previous conversations that have happened in this forum and at the KubeCon North America, the great conversation that Sean led with me there at the Contributor Summit. We took some notes from that and sort of put that into the background and also attempted to use that as the starting point for the plan we made here. So far it's been the authorship of this document is me and Justin. It's been really great to collaborate with Justin on this, and we would love to have more people who are passionate about this topic join us on this CAP whenever you're able to. So please feel free to jump in and comment on the CAP. The main point of presenting today is that we would like to invite questions and discussion. And also, if you want to reach out to us in Slack to get involved, then that's great too. So to just give a quick overview for those who might not have been present at the previous conversations, there is currently a feature in kubectl called pruning, which is part of the apply command and lets you sort of manage a set of objects the way that you apply manages fields. So you want to be able to declare that you have the set of objects that should exist. And if you then remove something from your set and you apply again, that object that you removed from the configuration should disappear from the cluster. So it adds that deletion ability. And this is something that's existed in kubectl since version 1.5. So very long-standing, but it's since then been an alpha, and there are a bunch of reasons for that, which are outlined in the CAP. Mainly around the implementation that was chosen, having some fundamental limitations that the bugs in question, it's very, very difficult to fix it without completely changing that. So there have been some previous attempts to sort of come up with alternatives, and there have been some experiments within SIG CLI in a different repo, not in the kubectl itself, to sort of prove out these different approaches. So what the SIG was thinking at KubeCon is that, we're at this point where we really need to get rid of the alpha. It's not good for our users to be continuing to provide an important feature with alpha level functionality. And that we can draw on these experiences to make a plan that we can agree to and get hopefully into 127 a new alpha that will work better and that we can iterate on. So part of the design that we're going for here is something that is fairly constrained as part of the plan and locked down, where we're not sure what we should be doing, so that we can get something in that will be a very good foundation for iteration, low level, something that we can build on, get feedback, and be able to move forward with and have it completely get rid of the older alpha. There is really quite a lot of information in there about the background, the feature history, and all the different alternatives that we saw in the community. The discussions that we've had so far are summarized. I don't want to spend the whole meeting going over that. So if you're interested in that background, if you're interested in getting involved in the effort, please take a look at that. And I think it's hopefully very useful. We can go over a bit of what we're proposing, though, at a high level to set a foundation for discussion. And I don't want to take up the whole time myself, though. Justin, did you want to cover that part?
Sure. Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to. And I think that was a perfect introduction. I think, yeah, I just emphasize, it's building on the discussion that we had at KubeCon. I think we're trying to do something very much in that spirit and start with an alpha and discover things. And I was saying, we should have, all these different objects. And Katrina was like, no, let's just pick one to start with, and we can always expand it later, but you can never sort of contract. So that's the spirit we're going with here. I think the other thing that I think was a big lesson for me from the talk which Sean and Katrina led was an idea that came up around porcelain versus plumbing, and that we should try to create some plumbing that can be used by lots of tooling. And so we are proposing something that we think is hopefully pretty lightweight and universal, and that all the tooling will be able to use, and that does not preclude, you know, Helm from doing its own thing, Kep from doing its own thing, people trying other things. It's just like, hey, if you add these labels, you can be sort of have some compatibility. And so specifically, we're talking about some labels. The idea is we have a parent object, which could be a, as it says there, config map secret or CRD of the tool's choice. We might constrain that for the alpha, but some, let's call it a parent config map. It will have a label. So you'll be able to do one of the accelerated like queries to get those objects. You discover this apply set key. And then in order to find the child objects, as it were, you do have to go and do, I think a weakness of this approach is you do have to go and do a query on a list of GVKs. That's something we've wrestled with a bunch, but I think there are some things we've done specifically to make that, to avoid the problems we identified in the earlier alpha. So we now have a specific list of GVKs that we're going to query. So it's scoped in that sense. We have a specific list of namespaces that we're going to query. Those are both annotations on that apply set object. So we think by doing that, we avoid a lot of the problems that happened before. And there's an explicit label that we propose on those child objects. So it becomes a set. It is still a set of queries, but it is a relatively efficient accelerated set of queries to discover the child object. So that's just a little bit further down, efficient listing of apply set contents. But you know, the comments here are super welcome, and particularly if you are a porcelain tool, that you know, whether these would work for you. We think they're pretty universal and not very demanding, and that they give us at the same time the functionality we need. And it's sort of actually in keeping with a lot of the implementation that we have today, more sort of fixing what they have. So I think it's good from that perspective as well. But there's a lot of details in this KEP, and you know, obviously, if you see anything that we could defer, that's super welcome as well. Like, you know, if there's something that we don't have to do right away in the alpha, that would be awesome, because then it leaves options open to us. So the goal is get this alpha out into people's hands, see what works, see what doesn't, and move forwards and evolve as we go forwards.
And as you can see in the scroll, there's like a bunch of places where we just tagged something as unresolved because we're kind of still having the conversation. So that's a good place to jump in as well. And another useful thing for framing is that, like Justin was talking about the porcelain and plumbing. So like kubectl will have a reference implementation of the standard that we're proposing here. So a lot of the KEP is talking about that standard because we want to make sure, like, the label basically, that's going to work for tools beyond kubectl, and that this makes sense on a fundamental level as the plumbing. And then at the end here, which is now on screen, we have like right now fairly skeleton proposal for what the reference implementation itself will look like. So that's another area that's like great to get SIG CLI input on, because that is, you know, where it all shakes out in our tool. And the basic idea here is that we can actually integrate this pretty seamlessly alongside the current alpha, so that people have that easier transition mechanism that should actually be fairly safe, based on the way that we see the proposal right now. Of course, when we start coding, we'll probably discover new things, but the idea is that we sort of have two mode, if you want to, it's a different framing, not one we use in any docs, but one that sort of occurred to me when we're working on this. There's sort of two different modes for using pruning right now. There's like the -- all flag, the -- label flag that constrains it in a different way. And this would be sort of a third mode that you could use. It's when you enable the apply set flag, it's mutually exclusive to the other two. You throw an error if you try to specify more than one of those three. And then that sort of opts you into this new mode. And we should be able to then have the two alphas alongside during that transition period.
I'm curious what you see the overlap here is with Helm, because Helm has some similar mechanisms for managing an installation, right? and they have server-side states and secrets or PostgreSQL, whatever, some way of storing what that unit, that unit of work is. Do you see those as just two parallel worlds, or do you think maybe there's some overlap?
I can take this. So we do somewhere in this talk, though, there is a section
Okay.
that like tries to look at like Helm and Kept and what Carvel Cap, I think it's called, what they actually do. What we're hoping is labels are lightweight enough that Helm, if they want to, would be able to add those labels as well. And then what you'd be able to do is you'd be able to say, like, if you were trying to like prune an object which Helm was managing, kubectl might be able to say things like, hey, hold on a minute, this isn't your object. Are you sure you really want to do that? That sort of thing. So if they come into the ecosystem, we can do things like detect overlapping apply sets or things like that. We can group objects in kubectl in future. The UI can do all these things. Like I don't really know what potential there is here, but like this is the plumbing for people to do all this stuff. And one of the reasons to do labels is because Helm could do this, I think, relatively easily as an additive thing. And they wouldn't have to like change how they store, their objects. They wouldn't have to fundamentally re-architect. They're just adding a couple of labels to be like, hey, I own this. Sort of like an owner's ref, right? Owner's ref is something they could add without sort of changing a lot of what they're doing. There's a description of why we can't use owner's refs, or why we think we can't use owner's refs in there as well. So that's broadly what I would hope, that all the tooling that is out there could opt in to start using these labels and would get the benefits of like kubectl not stomping over them. One of the reasons that we can't, there's a long-standing thing that Helm is separate from kubectl, and so we can't integrate the two. So, from that direction, it feels like plumbing in kubectl is the right way to go, plumbing and reference implementation that is ideally compatible with Helm, but I don't know if we could do anything deeper from a sort of this is the deal type thing perspective.
Thanks. I'll check it out. Thank you.
Awesome.
The name apply set, by the way, that's taken directly from a suggestion made during the live session at KubeCon. And I think it was made by a Helm maintainer. Is that right, Justin? Do you remember? It was made from.
Remember. It might have been Joe Beta, or it might have been a Helm maintainer. I don't know, but yes.
Okay, maybe it was Joe Beta. All right, it was not either of the two of us. We were taking somebody else's suggestion on that one.
But yes, we're open to suggestions on this stuff.
So I had a quick question, just as a clarification. So my understanding of this, I've already talked to Justin, and I've and Katrina and I, we also talked in that meeting. So if I understand this correctly, we're storing the GVKs and the namespaces in an object in the cluster. And of course, we need this GVK and namespace in order to be able to query to determine what the set of previously applied objects is. Is that correct?
Yes.
At a high
exactly.
level at 50,000
yes.
feet?
Yes.
Okay. And so I had already mentioned to Justin, I have a slight concern with so this is very similar to how it's done now. And so my concern is with the performance, we especially retrieving objects multiple times. So when we do the first apply step, if it's client side apply, we're going to be retrieving all of the objects in order to calculate the patch or see whether or not they exist. And then the second prune step with these GVKs and namespaces, we would also retrieve a set of objects, and if there's nothing to prune, then those objects are completely overlapping. So we're retrieving them twice. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we've certainly been like, I think you raise a good point here, and like this is, I think, something that we are trying to figure out what we can do there. And I think the structure of kubectl means that we probably would be retrieving the same object twice, simply because of how it's implemented. I don't know if we wanted to do a deeper refactoring, which I don't think we want to do for alpha, but if we wanted to do a deeper refactoring, like you might say that those two could probably be combined. And there are a lot of things that are going on here such that I would like to sort of try it and see how bad it is in practice. So for example, if you have, we don't expect there to be that many different kinds in a typical apply set. We don't expect there to be that many namespaces in a typical apply set. So we may actually come out cheaper in that a list can be fewer requests than a get. Like, so we lose some on the one side, but we gain some on the other because we're using a list which is like scoped by the only accelerated query in the API server, which is like label queries. It's not. The other thing that I was sort of thinking about is like, we do want to get everyone to server-side apply, right? That's the other thing that's, I think, motivated like your involvement here, right, Sean?
Correct.
And I think we're really thinking about server-side apply. I think Katrina and I were talking this morning about whether we could, there's some flexibility in, or we're debating whether a tool should name itself. So in other words, should an apply set encourage the tools to put an ID? And maybe there's some concern over whether a server-side apply would still need that initial get, because you want to detect overlapping apply sets. And we were wondering if it's possible to do that something with the field manager, and map that to the name of the tool, and whether that would actually be a really nice synergy. But I feel like this is sort of the thing where we have to do the code and see what shakes out. There's certainly, but yes, there is certainly the potential that this could be, in the worst case scenario, inefficient compared to other approaches like the inventory, where we store a list of every GVKNN. But my expectation is that when we build that alpha and put it into customers' hands, that we'll find that in typical cases, it is not actually a significant performance issue.
Cool, thanks. Okay, do we have any other questions or comments for Justin and Katrina? Okay, well then let's move on to the next item, since we do have a large agenda. So Maciej, would you like to go over some of the local host issues with kube control and the PRs and issues involved?
Yeah, so the original issue, the first one linked here, popped up during our bug scrub last week. So we basically took all of them in a single place and decided to discuss this today. It started basically from the general idea that the current message that we give a user when there is no valid kubeconfig is rather not helpful. And one of the reasons for that is because we are defaulting client Go to localhost 8080. So to tackle this problem, there will be actually two issues that we would have to solve. One would be, and it was approached in the past, and there are links in the agenda, was to get rid of the localhost defaulting entirely. Unfortunately, there are other code that relies on that. And if I remember correctly, the -- local, if you specify that and we drop the defaulting to localhost, that stopped working. So basically, if you don't have a kubeconfig, local does not work properly, and we should probably just make it so that the local should work without the requirement for a valid kubeconfig or any kubeconfig at all. And the majority of the code that we currently have relies, if not all, relies on the presence of that file. So solving both somewhat in parallel or one after another would be desirable, and we're just looking for someone who would be interested in picking this up. There will be a lot of digging through existing code and ensuring that this is working as it should. I'm not sure how much code we have with regards to --local, and I think based on the past experience that we don't have any tests around the local invocations. So yeah, that would have to be double checked before we proceed with eventual moves. And also having some kind of a reasonable mechanism. I wonder because currently we have the mechanism that should be able to know whether a local flag was specified, because if I remember correctly, local is one of the flags that we have in the generic CLI. A lot of times, generic CLI options. Maybe there would be an option to be able to not to require, because one of the PRs linked there approached the topic by adding conditions across all the commands, ensuring that if it's local, it should do something else, which I don't think is the right approach. I would want to see something more structural with regards to supporting the local or not inside of the CLI options somewhere. So this is more like if anyone is interested in, I'm more than happy to provide some guidance and help to push this through. It's a little bit of a bigger topic, but one that could actually benefit a ton of users, both developers and end users of kubectl.
Is the idea here that it's only when the user specifies --local explicitly, or whenever there's not a kube config?
Whenever there's no kubeconfig, we would prefer to see something reasonable rather than currently you will see the connection to server localhost was not able or something like that. So maybe providing a little bit more helpful message. Oh, you don't have. We weren't able to find a valid kubeconfig, or your kubeconfig is empty. Anything that would basically give a little bit more hint towards the user about what we've tried, and then at the same time getting rid of the localhost 8080 defaulting, because I'm not sure if anyone is running kube on localhost anymore. That goes back to the very early days when we used to do so. As you see, the issue from Brian is from 2016. When folks basically run kube clusters on their local machine, but since then it's just pointless. Usually you either have a valid kubeconfig or you don't, and you don't have, and you shouldn't be guessing anything. Probably.
Nice. One thing that surprised me was when I run kubectl in the cluster itself, inside of a pod, it magically works because the secrets are mounted somewhere. And that initially that was surprising me because I wasn't expecting it to work. I was expecting to have to do something, and it just magically worked. That's not the case maybe where it seemed like there was a bit of a gap in this expectation versus reality.
I mean, I remember either making a presentation during one of the past KubeCons about the possibilities or hidden options, let's call it that way, within the kubectl. Although actually that particular bit is even present inside of the client Go itself. So whenever you're building your tools on top of the client Go, the defaulting logic that figures out that you're already running inside of the cluster, and it is looking at 2 or 3 environment variables, which are pointing to service account secrets mounted and the Kube API server address, and based on that, it can easily pick it up. Of course, you can pass something on your own, but that's actually a very helpful way, because you don't have to explicitly do so, but rather you're basically reusing the service account that is by default injected into any pod running the cluster.
Yeah, so this one is gonna touch a lot of parts of the stack, from loading kubeconfig to warning the user. So if there's anyone who's kind of interested but intimidated in working in this, feel free to let us know. You can let me know. I think this might be a good one if we get like a pairing group together on, if we have a few people working on it together. Because this will really touch all parts of kube control, from like loading to warning and running. You don't have to do it here. You can Slack us.
Just to add to that, and a similar issue, the issue number 1340, that was assigned to me, and I thought it would be a simple issue where I have to change the warnings, and I added a follow-up comment on that. Yeah, issue 1340. Yeah, I believe this is where I needed help, and that is what is being discussed right now. So if someone can just quickly look at the last comment over there.
Yeah, we should sync up there. I'd like to show you how to find that file.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot.
yeah, for sure. Hit me on Slack.
Sure.
Yeah, nothing like working on an issue that's been around for 6 years. Okay, are we happy to move to the next topic? Okay, let's do that. Eddie, take it away.
Yeah, so this was an older one that Howard was working on. This was adding extra columns support. So you could tack on extra columns, and his implementation was good, except it dropped a bunch of client-side calculated columns. And so ultimately he closed this and didn't want to move forward on it. I think Varsha wanted to pick this up. I don't know if Varsha's on the call right now. No, okay. I can poke Varsha on Slack, but we wanted to, this originally was refreshed by a user requesting adding a specific column. This one, I'll put it in the chat. And we don't really want to add like more flags for like small specific columns. We'd rather have like a blanket, people can add the columns they need feature. And so that's where this stemmed from. And I put it on the agenda because there was something we had to talk about, but I didn't write it down on the agenda. Does anyone remember what we talked about last week? I think Macha, you had ideas for this and how it could be achieved.
I remember looking at the code, and in general, it shouldn't have any problems because the idea that I had in my head was that the code for his extra columns was only to be built on top of the current printing mechanism, where you would only add the additional value specified by a user. So I would imagine, because by default, all the printing is being specified by the cluster. The cluster returns as table objects, which provide you with specific values that should be printed. To support the extra columns, we would have to explicitly request that a full object is included as the last column, which is not a case by default. But whenever, for example, we are sorting, we are requesting those the full resource for sorting purposes. So I would imagine something similar to what sorting does with regards to retrieving the resource, and then a regular printing should should happen, and then only the additional resources columns could be added at the end of the output. So I'm happy to help someone revive this PR and provide some hints where we could get it to completion, especially that last week during the bug scrub, there was a request to add additional values for the get command, where we would prefer not expanding the current get, but rather allow users to have the freedom to pick those additional columns by themselves.
Okay. I'll have to sync up with Varsha. I know she wanted to work on it. So
If she's interested, I'm just to send her my way. I'm happy to jump on a quick call, and I'll double check the code and provide some pointers and hints where we could try to do it or how to do it.
Okay, cool. Next one was mine too. Christoph has joined us. I hope I got your name right. Thank you for joining us. This was a PR that was open to add priority support when draining pods. I believe right now the order of draining pods is either non-deterministic or just based on Go's range. And so Christoph had a PR that wanted to add a drain by priority flag where it would respect pods priorities when choosing which ones to drain. When we talked about this in the bug scrub last week, we thought it might be a good idea even to make this the default behavior, but there were some caveats and other things we would have to talk through to make that happen. So we invited him today here. Thank you for joining us. Maciej, did you remember what you wanted to talk through?
Trying to recall. I think the original issue was what kind of guarantees we currently provide with regards to prioritizing. And on top of that, there was a question about whether we want to have a generic mechanism rather than specific for, because you're basically proposing priorities as the only option for sorting the pots for drain. But I started wondering whether there will be, if we add respecting priorities, if there will be questions for, oh, I want to have yet another feed or something else, and what kind of options other users might want to see. And rather than adding one-offs, we would try to tackle this in a more generic way so that users have a little bit more freedom with regards to oh, you have the ability to pick whichever field you're comfortable with, kind of like sort in the get command.
Oh, so instead of considering the priority field itself, you would want to consider any kind of field, right?
Yes, and basically we would have to figure out whether that kind of approach would be better, and what are the current defaults that we have. We could probably change the defaults as they are if we don't have any particular guarantees currently, and then rather than having a one-off, more generic approach would be better probably.
Well, the only place I have encountered the priority handling of pods is node shutdown. I'm not sure if there is anything else in the whole Kubernetes, to be honest.
I wouldn't say that just within the cube. It would be nice to either send an email to Cube Dev or Cube users and try to figure out, or poke users or questions about if they see that this is something that they would be interested in, or whether they considered any prioritization or any kind of sorting, ordering for drain command, or maybe it's just not something that anyone cares and you don't have to deal with it at all.
Well, the one thing that I considered but never really implemented or tried to implement was specifying a list of priorities that it would kind of bucket those pods based on the list, and not drain by priority for each single value. So for example, you could like drain critical pods, then those second level critical pods, then let's say priority above 1000 or something like that.
Oh,
right now it's kind of dumb. I mean, just
I remember when we were discussing this last time, the first thing that popped up in my head, and you just said it the same way. I started wondering whether people will be interested in, when they will be interested in draining by priorities, whether they will be interested in draining critical first and then follow, or in a different order where the criticals would be the last one. And that was my one of my first questions that I had. And then the generic mechanism basically followed, because I've seen questions in both directions to be able to drain either critical first or reverse.
Yeah, I don't think, I just dug up the cap. I don't think that pod priority went GA until 116. So I think that if pod priority had been a thing when drain was being created at the start, it would have been the default, because I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be.
Well, the one thing that it changes is the speed of draining the node, because people could learn to expect it to be fast, but right now it kind of pauses on every level of the priority. So it's potentially can take a few minutes instead of half a minute, let's say.
You mean the version with or without the priorities working?
Yeah. Yeah, without the priorities, it all shuts down at once, and it takes as long as the longest shutting down pod. And in my version, it can take potentially a lot of time if we have a few pods at different priorities taking a lot of time to shut down. So that can be a big change. If somebody expects for it. Yeah, continue.
Is this making me wonder if there's like an in-between option that might be suitable instead of respect priorities or completely generic? Maybe we have something like a order mode flag that takes an enum where we have like all at once or by priority, and that would give us an extension point like Maciej is looking for in the future to potentially support different ordering targets or strategies without having to support everything arbitrarily, like pointing at arbitrary fields, which would probably be pretty difficult to implement.
Yeah, that sounds good. Like the default could be the simplest, or just group by critical priorities and then everything else. And then there could be that detailed ordering based on the exact value. I think this could work.
I'll try talking with our cluster folks. I know that they are heavily relying on the draining mechanism, although they are reusing the current drain implementation. I'll see if they experimented with different sorting mechanisms, or if they did not. I'd be curious because we are heavily relying on this mechanism during OpenShift upgrades. So I'll check with them what kind of options that they did consider, and I'll leave some comments in the issue.
Yeah, one thing to consider, we have had discussions about the drain, if we could prioritize also the pods that are not ready, which has an impact, especially for when you are using PDBs. And you can prioritize the unready pods first. If that could even go like first, if you could prioritize first according to the unready status and then according to priority, or which combination?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Sean, are you on mute?
Whoops, I was on mute. So do we have enough information to move forward? Christoph, do you have the information you need to make progress?
Yeah, I think I could, yeah, at least try to implement some of those strategies and maybe leave the rest for later.
Okay, and
It shouldn't be too hard to change that flag to specific, to like enum or something like that.
okay, great.
It could be like ordering or something like that with drain.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to move on to the next topic. Is that okay? Okay, Arda, would you like to take over on the KEP about built-in command shadowing support by plugins?
Yes. This KEP is basically allowing external plugins as subcommands for kube control create command. And I just need some feedback and review, and that would be great if you have some time. That's why I put it in the agenda.
Is there anyone who wants to volunteer now to work with Arda on this
I'll
KEP?
make sure to have a look at his KEP. I promised him that earlier.
Cool.
So I'll make sure to have a look at it tomorrow and provide feedback about it.
Thanks, Maciej.
Is there anything about the KEP that you'd like to discuss here, or can we move on to the next topic?
We can move on. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks for bringing that up. And Noah, with the final topic, is Noah here?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so basically I recognize that some of the documentation might be outdated, and I brought it up. I guess Katrina was kind of confirming that at least that one particular documentation was outdated somehow, and this is just a draft where I tried to do some simplification, but there's a lot of questions that basically have to be answered by you guys. So I just wanted to bring it up so that someone can maybe have a look there and give me some feedback, so I can somehow help you finalizing that.
Are the questions that you have the ones there in the summary?
Yeah, actually, yes, and I guess I made some comments inside the documentation in this draft where I was not sure. Yeah, maybe someone can check the questions and also the comments in the PR.
I don't know if I can answer every question, but I'll definitely take a look at it.
Cool.
It's on my agenda too. It's in my list too. I see I've tagged on it, and I will get to it eventually, but don't wait for me. As mentioned earlier, I'm working on the customized major release and the KEP, so I have a lot on my plate right now. I'm sorry for the delay on that and other things.
That's okay. I mean, yeah.
Okay, well, it looks like we may have gotten through this very full agenda with a couple minutes left. Is there anything else we'd like to address before we sign off?
Yeah, actually, does anybody know of an example of using enums in kubectl?
I'm sorry, go ahead, say that again, Christoph.
I mean, does anybody know an example of using enums in kubectl flags?
Yes, the dry run flag is an enum, so it could be client, server, or none.
Okay.
So I think it's just a string. You know, a set of strings.
Yeah, let's see.
So what would the enums be for this one? It would be like default by priority, and then do we care about whether it's priority ascending or descending? Are those different things, or is it always the same?
I think it should always be ascending, because those class that system critical usually it goes to really critical pods that should not be torn down before all the rest before it is off. Like, for example, I was unable to shut down my machine because it was not draining in the proper order.
Is default the right name there, I guess, or is it none? Is it, I don't know.
Well, actually, I'm thinking it could be kind of like a list of values. So you like comma separated. So it would first go by the first type, then by the second, then on and on. And we can't, drain specifically by priority, ignore priorities, or as you noted, base it on status. Like if it's not ready, then just take those first.
So rather than a strategy, then we have a list flag.
Yeah, it would. I think it would be a list flag would be the best, because it would be possible to implement different strategies and sort them, combine them, and yeah.
I would still double check the possibilities and the options that we would have to have before actually implementing it. Just by talking about it for a short while, you're basically, you went from a simple by priority over to enums, through enums to list, which is introducing even more complicated way of specifying how the draining should look like. I'm worried that by following this pattern, you basically come into a place where you come up with a simple DSL just to be able to specify that priority. And that's something that I would not want to see happening in the first place. So I would prefer to go back a step and try to figure out the actual problems that are there before solving them. So a quick survey over to CubeDev
Well, I guess
users and ask
for a-
users what they are looking for before coming up with the variety of ways that we can solve the issue.
Well, for me, the pretty much the only issue is that I cannot replicate node shutdown without turning off the machine. That's kind of the only issue I was aiming to solve.
Right, we understand that, but at the same time, when we introduce a flag to kube control, it's a pretty big deal. So we want to make sure that we're introducing something that is going to serve us well in the future. Like once we have that flag, is that going to give somebody an idea? Well, I wish it was ordered this way. So that's why Maciej is suggesting that you send an email to KDev to solicit opinions on what those other things, like those unknowns, might be, so that it can inform what your flag looks like from the beginning, and we don't end up painting ourselves into a corner where the flag doesn't actually work for a lot of other legitimate use cases in this exact same area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think preemption is still something you should be looking at pretty closely, because there's a lot of nuances in terms of preemptibility. Pods can already and there's pod groups, co-scheduling, gang scheduling. There's a lot of sort of related concepts that might be worthwhile.
Yeah, actually, I was not aware of the preemption. It would be definitely a good idea to consider also that second field, preemption field. Like
Yeah,
if somebody is not.
Sorry, please.
Yeah, so if the pod is not meant to be preempted or preempting, or yeah, whatever you call it, then we could just throw it into one bucket.
Yeah,
without ordering by priority.
Yeah, the co-scheduler, for example, already takes into account, the gangs, the groups of the pod groups, takes into account preemptibility and priority classes. So maybe even like from an alpha perspective, a kubectl drain -- preempt, and then it just asks the scheduler, in this case, the co-scheduler in my example, which to do a preempt all,
Yeah, actually, that would be very clean solution, at least for the first version, or yeah, for the final version even maybe. Like if some pod is marked to be preempting, then just take it down first before everything else.
Yep.
Well, or last, actually, last, not first.
Okay, well, we've gone slightly over the time. Appreciate everybody for joining us. A full and interesting discussion. Hope to see you again in 2 weeks. Goodbye.
Bye.